with just playing this for like a half an hour. And that's why their time is so good. Because, I mean, as time has gone, I've realized, that I have plenty of black friends who are not very funky and plenty of white friends who really are funky. So it's not definitely not that. It's what you expose yourself to. And I learned from just that little, my embarrassing moment that if I really worked on my time a lot, my time got so much better when I started actually transcribing. I knew something because I always wanted to be the Eric Clapton. I wanted to be Dwayne Allman. I wanted to be the guy in the light playing the solos, so I never even considered rhythm parts. I just figured, it's rhythm part? What could be hard about playing a C major 7 in time? Then you get like, where you, and nowadays with Logic and Pro Tools, you get under the microscope. So obviously you're standing there with no clothes on. You think, oh man, I'm like rushing every one of these things. And sometimes with me, it's still a problem. It depends on the groove. And I think everybody has their comfort zones where they can kind of lock in really easy, and other ones where it's like a little harder to. But I think with time, you kind of figure out how to make the ones you're uncomfortable with still work. You figure out which parts are going to work. But I think most of the problems that most of my, and I'll say jazzy only because those are the guys who you realize they know so much and they've studied their instruments so much that you kind of go, God, this guy only could play in time. He'd be awesome. And that's the real common problem with a lot of guys. And it's often overlooked. I think when you're 19, 20 years old, you're so excited about playing this lick or that lick that you don't really realize how important that is. But you guys know 98% of what you do in a band situation is play rhythm with other people. So you've got to kind of find a part that works. And that brings it kind of back to all that, the songwriting. The thing I appreciate about George Harrison and all those guys is when I listen to those parts, man, they just fit right in the pocket, and they're just the right parts at the right time. So there's a couple of things. I tell my students, I say, record yourself. Get a small recorder and record. I have like 4 of them sitting around my house just in case I come up with an idea, in the shower or whatever. I'll put on, grab a guitar off the wall and play an idea. But I tell them to record themselves doing these, playing along with a metronome for about 2 minutes. That's all it takes. And, sure enough, I used to do it, go, man, whenever I change the C sharp minor, man, I always rush that. Or I can't do this chord right. And every time I try to go, that little Paul Jackson lick, I always rush that. Or whatever. When you're under, it's like hearing your voice on a voice machine. You go, do I sound like that? It's a little. It always is a little bit more revealing when you hear it, on the speakers. So I tell my students to record themselves when they're practicing, and listen back to it, and also immediately, I especially for soloing, I tell my students to sing along with what they're playing. And it's kind of an old thing that everybody kind of knows. Immediately, it's and I've been so guilty of this in the past, so I can relate. It's like when you're trying to play a solo and you're jamming with somebody, and you go, man, just one more time through, and you want to just play a better solo because you're just having a sucky day that day. One more time. I left that one lick. You just keep going. And I tell my students, I say, okay, first you got to stop and make eye contact with the audience. And I know that sounds silly, but it's so true because it gets you out of your little bubble, your little tunnel vision world of like thinking that if I play that one more lick, it's going to work just fine. Make eye contact with the audience, and open up and sing along with your solos. I tell my students, I tell them to pretend that the first 8 bars of the solo is the melody. I say, okay, pretend I don't have a melody for Giant Steps. Pretend I don't have a melody for Falling Grace. Just you make up something that I'm going to remember. And they automatically, when they start singing along and kind of get that in their head, man, their playing just exponentially gets better when they sing along with their playing. And of course, nobody really wants to hear. I'm not really talking about that, but just to kind of internalizing it to the point where it's really coming from here. Boom, ba, boom, ba, boom, ba. Can be like 10 times more musical than or whatever. And maybe that's another side effect of getting old is that the licks and stuff impress me less and less. And if somebody can play a couple notes with a lot of soul, that I'm going to remember the next day. The great thing about Pat Metheny, who's I think is one of the best composers we have, is I haven't never worked at a lot of his licks, but I can sing probably every one of his solos on about 3 or 4 of his records because they're just so damn melodic, So that's a lot of it too. I think a lot is if I were going to try to break down what's the difference between some of my good students who have gone on who become kind of famous in their own right, guys who've been very successful and guys that were not. A lot of it too is there just, and this I don't mean to get too out there, but is there just positive thinking? Because I know a lot of them, when they're playing with me, maybe it's because they're playing with me or maybe because they don't have a lot of experience, but they'll play, they go, oh no, I suck. And I stopped him right there immediately. I said, okay, number one, I said, don't let me know that you're sucking, because I thought it sounded fine before, and it's a dead giveaway. And then even beyond that, I say, look, if you're negative right now, and then you do it later on today, you're in a class where you do the same thing, and then next week you're doing the same thing in another class where you're just like beating yourself up. You know how fast time goes by? All of a sudden, we can remember what we did 6 months ago like that, All of a sudden you have like a whole year of this negativity built up. That's one place you can start. Just don't make that stupid face. And that's a physical thing, but it can kind of turn into a more positive attitude, I think, for the teacher. I said, just imagine if you were like really positive and really sure of yourself a year from now, how much that could all add up in the plus column. So that stuff always seems to help, with students. And that's, if I were going to say there's one thing that I noticed between the students that are really successful and the ones that are not, it's a positive attitude. And that's really like, they just kind of have this confidence that, and they can start, and everybody has insecurities and everybody has days and feelings about their own playing. Everybody, that's how you progress, of course, is by critiquing your own playing. But there's also got to be a sense of, you got to have a little bit of, I'm a badass and I'm going to show you what I can do. You got to have a little bit of that in your, I think, just to help push you, to the next level. I've always kind of been a traditional. I mean, I like my traditional guitars, like my Fenders and my Gibsons, a whole lot, and I always will. But when they started making guitars for me, I just kind of told them what I wanted, and I wanted a light body. This is a light. Gosh, I think is it ash? I don't know. Pine? Maybe it's balsa wood? I don't know. It's pretty light, whatever it is, and that was one of the. There's everybody has this. For a while it was like if the guitar wasn't light, it wasn't going to sound good. I found, I think, from that guitars that sound differently. The heavier, for instance, Paul Jackson Jr. has a pretty heavy type of Les Paul guitar, and he seems to get a really good tone. And I found that with heavier guitars seem to be more pointed and more defined outsides with their when you're doing like single note picking. Where the lighter guitars seem to be kind of fluffier, a little floppier on the bottom end, but nice for like high solo things, which is maybe why Scott Henderson loves really light guitars, because for the solo lines up high, they're really nice and fluffy. This one I'm going for maybe a combination of both, and that the body's light, so the notes up high seem to be pretty thick and sing out, and the maple neck gives it a little bit more of a snap than rosewood would, a little more distinction. So it's kind of a hybrid in between. But it's I have I think these are Xotic pickups in the front too, and this is a Tom Holmes pickup in the back here, which is it's a nice like a PAF copy. Not to be confused with John Holmes. Gee, who's that, Alan? Well, but I set up all my guitars with tail pieces where they where I can get like a vibrato on them like that, and I can pull up about a whole step. Almost exactly, just because sometimes I include harmonics like in the melodies. Depending on how used to, I have to kind of get used to the way the springs and different guitars are too. But this one's been on. I've had this on the road for the last 5 years. All the Gino Vanelli stuff we did all through Canada and overseas. This guitar has just been great. It stays in tune really great when I do it. This. I mean, they're Xotic. It's hard to compete with Fender and Gibson, So I kind of feel for these guys, but they're really great, solid guitars. They're as good as anything, I think. So it's just a maple neck with a maple cap. I like having the truss rod out here because when I do travel abroad, I have to adjust the neck a lot because sometimes the humidity or whatever will cause the neck to bow one way or the other. So it's nice having that there instead of having to take the neck off. Other than that, I just think it's aesthetically kind of cool. I mean, the contours are a little different without being too radical. It's not like a Dean guitar or anything kind of weird with the big head size. It's still within the realm of traditionalism that I can still kind of go for a little. And it's got a great, got a nice clean sound, I can still, because there's some guitars that are nice, that are lightweight, that have maple necks on them, especially that can be like this ear-piercingly bright, and this isn't. I think it's because of the lightness of the body. It kind of helps mellow it out, I think. Spurzels. Tom Holmes, not John Holmes. Besides that, it's pretty simple guitar. I think Pat Wilkins does their finishes for him up in the valley. I don't know what else I can tell you about. But all this stuff is pretty good. Here does a great job at Xotic. I think they have yeah, there's other guitars here. I guess if anybody wants to play them or try them out or whatever, feel free. Take one home with you. Yeah. Is that not part of the deal? So yeah, I'm working on my 4th CD. That's what I'm doing these days. I'm about 6 or 7 songs into it, and hopefully going to Japan maybe in April to do some more clinics and more tours. I'm playing the Baked Potato, this club in Los Angeles, next Tuesday with my band, and this week it's a guy named Jeff Babco on keyboards and a drummer named Oscar Seaton and a guy named J.V. Collier playing bass. These are all guys that have like long lists of people they played with, from Sheryl Crow. Jeff's been on the road with Sheryl Crow and James Taylor. So I'm dropping names here, not about myself, but I know somebody who plays with Sheryl Crow. But it's a great band anyway. And if you're around Tuesday night, it's pretty. I think if you tell them you're a student, even if you're not, you can get a discount from like $10 to $7 or something like that. Save yourself $3 to pay for a fourth of your drink.
I noticed that you do a lot of upstroke picking and more than downstroke, and then the alternative up and down usually you just
there's absolutely no rhyme or reason. I don't know why I do that. I think it's just laziness. That's all I can attribute it to. Is just human nature. You know, the most I could get away with with the least amount of effort was what I was going for. And I think because I picked like that, and because I learned how to like do the hammer-on stuff as well as I did, that I only kind of had to. I really only pick whenever I change strings. Like if I go, I'm only picking. I actually have my students sometimes practice scales without picking at all, just to build up. Like we were talking about strength in left hand for legato playing. I sometimes have them just go. See if they can do that slow and where you can kind of hear each note as well as you can. And of course, steady and I mean that's a hard thing too. There's a lot of students at MI who can do the real fast stuff. You hear them at Guitar Center every day, right? That's not that big of a deal. But to really do that stuff really slow. Can be really pretty, but you kind of have to make all those notes really. It's almost like the volume of the hammered notes are more than the picked notes. They really are. I think that when I'm warmed up and I'm playing good, you can't really tell when I'm picking and when I'm not picking. I think that's kind of the beauty of legato playing is they can get these long lines you don't really hear. You hear. That's not giving you a good example right now, but yeah. Yeah, that's the idea, I think. I remember in single string classes at MI with this one teacher who's a great teacher named Dan Gilbert. He was, he used to always get mad at me because I quit going to his class because I couldn't do any of the exercises. I mean, they were doing, I could never do that, alternate picking like some guys could do. I was just terrible. But I could do I could hammer on stuff like that, stuff that other people would double pick, but I could kind of hammer on and make it stretching out. Is that linearly? Stretching out this way on the fretboard. Sometimes, to do an arpeggio, it'd be like, instead of, it'd be. And so a lot of my exercises kind of morphed into. I mean, it's really just because I couldn't do this stuff the right way, and I just kind of started hammering on and stretching things out, and then I realized, oh, that's kind of cool because between the G and the B string, I can kind of get the kind of doubling effect, which kind of like saxophones do that when they kind of do this like they kind of do like two notes at the same time with the different pads, so it sounds a little different timbre. Things like that were kind of cool. When I started stretching, I said, "Oh, that's kind of cool." And I found like little techniques I could use in my playing, like a little slide and stretch technique, which is for lack. I couldn't think of anything more original to call it. But So I can get from here to here, one position is by just kind of taking, and that was probably maybe from an Allen Holzer